Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Jay and I'm a naval historian, and over the next few weeks I am going to talk about what I consider one of the best, until it failed, naval treaties and disarmament treaties the world has ever known, and that is the Washington Naval Conference. So this week I plan on giving you some background on this. I did consult nearly 30 sources. I will put those in the description, as well as there's a couple of great resources in book form that I have read and highly recommend. Uh, since the main two parties involved were basically, as I'll explain later, was basically a three-way arms race between the United States, Great Britain, and Japan. America and Japan kind of ended up being focused because of the naval war that occurred in the Pacific War in the 40s. So from that, I highly recommend From Mahan to Pearl Harbor by Sadao Asada. This book is from the Naval Institute Press. I believe I got it for around 20-25 bucks. Should still be in print. Great read. Gives you great background from what the United States Navy and Japanese Navy was thinking in their strategic thought and planning between 1890 and Pearl Harbor in 1941. More specifically to the Washington Naval Conference is an edited collection edited by Eric Goldstein and John Mayer. The Washington Conference, 1921-1922, Naval Rivalry, East Asian Stability, and the Road to Pearl Harbor. What I like about it is not that volume is not only do they focus on the three treaties that were involved, but they also go into the background of all five of the major powers that ended up signing the Five Power Treaty, which were the United States, Great Britain, Japan, as well as France and Italy. I'll also put links to those to where you can find those. I know the Washington Naval Conference one is a little harder to find sometimes, and if you do find it new, it's sometimes a bit on the pricey side. I fortunately was able to find mine used, so I didn't have to pay quite as much. But hopefully you'll be able to do that. Of course, the once I put the links down, the books will be from bookshop.org, not a sponsor, but I do appreciate that they donate part of their money to help local bookstores. Without further ado, we're going to get into the background on the Washington Naval Conference. And in full disclosure, I did have assistance from Notebook LM as AI to prepare this, as it just takes a lot to do these videos. I'm trying to use AI more to get these produced in a timely manner and still have something interesting to watch. So in 1919, the smoke had barely cleared from the battlefields of the Great War. The world was exhausted, yet in the shipyards of America, Great Britain, and Japan, the hammers never stopped. Instead of a peace dividend, the world was entering a naval arms race that would end up potentially being more expensive and more dangerous than the one that had preceded the war between the British and the Germans. By 1921, the United States was pouring a fifth, 20% of its entire national budget into naval construction. The question was no longer if another war would happen, but when the world's economies would simply collapse under the weight of their own steel. With that said, the backdrop of the 1921 conference wasn't just military. It was a fight for survival against the Depression of 1920 to 1921. Because as you may not be aware, because World War One ended so suddenly, there was no kind of sort of guided off ramp to prevent an economic collapse like there was after the Second World War, where it was easy to see when they could start slowing down production, especially of aircraft and tanks, as the Allies were getting closer to overthrowing Germany. And they also knew they could ship a lot of that equipment from Europe over to the Pacific to use in what eventually the planned Operation Downfall, which didn't happen. Uh, Going back to 1920, 1921, in America, over 5 million people were out of work, and the price of cotton had dropped by 75% in a single year. Herbert Hoover, then Commerce Secretary, became the leading advocate for disarmament as a tool for economic recovery. Hoover argued that if Europe didn't stop spending its wealth on guns, it would never have the financial stability to buy American agricultural surpluses. He believed that disarmament was the top priority for the nation's help. And I would also note that not only was this kind of a revolutionary thought from Hoover, that you have to remember that Hoover and the Americans in the Harding administration were following up with from Wilson's administration, and while they didn't completely agree with Wilson, there was this sense that we saw how the great powers of Europe failed and led up to the war, and then we saw the vindictiveness of the European powers against Germany, and they were just like, okay, we got to approach this differently. And of course, the British were still being run by the old school major power folks. So when Hoover looked at his ledgers, the United States Navy looked at the Pacific. Japan was pursuing this ambitious 8-8 fleet program, so 8 massive modern battleships and 8 massive modern battle cruisers, which would have given them 25 capital ships by the mid 1920s. The U.S. responded naturally by moving the majority of its battleships to the Pacific in 1921, fearing that the hated by American Navy Anglo-Japanese alliance might be turned against them. In Japan, the strain was actually worse. 48% of the national budget was being consumed by defense expenditures, namely with the Navy. And just to clarify, the Anglo-Japanese alliance was signed back in, I believe it was 1903, between 1904 and 1906. I can't remember exactly when off the top of my head, as part of Jackie Fisher's reforms, which we discussed earlier or late last year. And that was that whole alliance was allowed Jackie Fisher to free up assets in the Pacific and move them back to the Atlantic so he could have his flotilla defense and flying squadrons. And finally, I have to say, and like mentioned earlier, this era marked a clash between the old diplomacy of the secret treaties and the old great power concept to a new diplomacy of public accountability, which was especially championed by the Americans. Liberal thinkers like Yoshino Sakuso hoped that this conference would signal the rule of morality over just pure naked power. In the United States Senate, William Borah, whose name will come up a lot as I discuss more in the future what was going on with isolationism in a future series. He'll come up a lot. But Senator Borah introduced a resolution for disarmament that tapped into a global yearning for peace. So President Harding eventually issued invitations in August 1921 to the 9 great powers. He was not just calling the meeting, he was trying to stave off first a global bankruptcy and then eventually a potential war. And as we'll come to see over the next couple of weeks, it was basically, you'll see the usual diplomatic squabbling. But the outcome actually did slow down the start of the next major war. With that said, I hope you liked the video. Again, I put my citations as well as links to the 2 books I recommended at the top down in the description. Please like the video. Share with someone you think this is interesting. Subscribe if you haven't. If you're going to comment, please be kind and respectful to each other. And I will be back next week in which we'll talk about the conference itself and go from there. And until then, bye-bye.